Good evening. My name is Cindy Jones, and this is my book report video conference. Tonight I will be discussing the book Zigzag, The Surprising Path to Greater Creativity by Keith Sawyer. Sawyer writes this book detailing 8 steps for better creativity. In short, these are the 8 steps. Step 1 is to ask. Step 2 is to learn. Step 3 is to look. Step 4 is to play. Step 5 is to think. Step 6 is to fuse. Step 7 is to choose. And step 8 is to make. He goes into great detail and gives many examples of activities to do for each step. Unfortunately, we don't have that kind of time for me to go into detail about all of the activities in each one. So I'm going to go through and briefly share a few in each step. For step 1, ask. His main idea is that you should find the right question. He includes a lot of really awesome quotes throughout the book for each of these chapters. One of my favorite quotes in this chapter was to judge a man by his questions rather than his answers. And his point was that sometimes we're not asking the right question. So 3 of the suggestions he gives for finding the right question is to first try 10 questions. His idea here is that you write down 10 different formulations of any problem that you're having all in one sitting as quickly as you can and try to make them different as possible. As an example, he explains one of his problems was getting rid of mice in his home. And some of the questions he wrote down for try 10 questions was, how do I get the mice out of my house? How do I catch mice? Why are there mice in my house in the first place? How did they get in? And he goes on to some funnier ones like, how can we persuade all the mice to leave our neighborhood? How can I make my backyard more attractive than the inside of my house? Why do mice exist in the first place, and how can we force them into extinction? The point being here that as you write down these 10 different questions, one of these questions may turn out to be a better question than your initial one. Another strategy he gives in order to increase creativity is to find the bug. He uses the example of programmers who find bugs all the time in their programs. He thinks debugging can boost creativity because tiny annoyances are often symptoms of bigger problems. So his suggestion is to make a list of minor inconveniences in your home and figure out ways to solve them. The next one he calls Rise to the Occasion. For this example, he pulls from the CIA. The CIA developed a checklist of 10 questions. You can find them in the book, but he finds that they're very relevant questions and helpful in boosting creativity. A few examples of them are, why does this problem need to be solved? What benefits come from solving the problem? What don't you understand yet? What information do you have? Is it sufficient or is it contradictory? What are the various parts of the problem? What cannot be changed about the problem? And so on. He also talks about searching the space. And in this, he talks about breaking things down. This is a way to really dig deep, drill down into the problem, and figure out the problem more closely. He also is very big into drawing graphic organizers for us visual learners. He gives examples of how to draw a fishbone and narrow down your problem. He talks about mapping your ideas, kind of like our webs we used in school to plan for writing, idea maps. And he talks a lot about challenging your assumptions. He mentions that sometimes the things we think are true are not necessarily true. And we have to challenge the things that we are assuming are correct. He also talks a lot about transforming the problem, that maybe the problem you're trying to solve is different than what you're initially thinking. He gives a great example I found very interesting, that back in the 1700s, they were trying to cure the disease, smallpox. And they kept asking the question, how can we cure this disease, which is killing all of our citizens? But eventually, a physician, Edward Jenner, realized that milkmaids never got the smallpox, so he changed the question. He transformed the problem into, why don't milkmaids get the smallpox? And to make a long story short, because of that question, they were able to come up with a vaccine. He also talks a lot about going back from the future. So instead of trying to start from what you don't have to a solution, he talks about figuring out what the solution would look like and coming back to your problem. It's a very interesting idea. He also talks about picking the worst idea, and he gives an example of a toy company who was trying to come up with a better doll, and they thought of the idea rather of a hooker doll, which of course is the worst idea. But what that led to was a doll, which I think might be Barbie. They don't say that, but that has everything a girl could want: clothes, fancy cars, nice house, and so on. And then he talks a lot about stretch and squeeze. And he gives an example with 5 questions. Again, to look at things from a different way. And mentions that if you're stumped, you might be looking at the problem in the wrong way. I found the step 1 asking section very, very interesting, because he does give a lot of great advice about how to find better questions and how to think about a problem in a different way. The next step is learn. Exceptional creators, he says, are not born that way. They practice deliberately. He also gives this amazing statistic that people who are really great at their craft, some of the best creators, some of the best musicians, artists, literally have practiced 10,000 hours or more of deliberate practice. And we will talk about that in a moment. And he talks a lot about always being ready to move beyond what you already know or think you already know, moving beyond what you think you're capable of doing, and moving beyond what the world already believes. So in step 2, of course, he talks about challenging yourself. He talks about focusing on specific tasks. In other words, looking at the trees instead of the forest, so to speak, breaking it down so you have small, manageable challenges rather than one huge one. Talks a lot about reflecting. This is very big in many industries. So what are you doing that's working? What are you doing that's not working? What can you improve on? Things like that. He talks about getting schooled. So teachers staying up to date on the most current learning theories. Other professions staying current on those. He mentions being a lifelong learner, seeking knowledge relentlessly. He also mentions, he said something in the book I thought was very insightful. It says that the difference between experts and novices isn't that experts have more knowledge. He says it's that they have different knowledge. So that's interesting. Again, looking at things from a different point of view. He also talks about getting a mentor and how that can be very helpful. It's very big on reading books, staying up on the websites with current knowledge, and constantly trying to learn more. Step 3 was a little confusing to me, but as I went back and read it, it's got some great ideas as well. Step 3 is to look. And Henry David Thoreau, one of his quotes he includes in here, stated, "The question is not what you look at, but it is what you see." And I have read some books, we've read some books in this class, I think, about a lot of times a big percentage of what you see is what you think you're supposed to see, not actually what is there. So in step 3, he talks about becoming more aware. So walking around the neighborhood, looking at things, being very, very aware of what is around you, looking for the new or the unusual, something surprising. He also suggests that you look for patterns. He gives some fun examples. If you're stuck in traffic listening to the radio, what patterns do you see or trends in popular music? When you're shopping, what trends or patterns do you see in product packaging? And he says when you're watching TV, instead of pausing or skipping over the commercials, think about how they're changing over the years. Why? He gives a lot of examples, really too many to go into here. He also talks about switching perspectives. This is something, as a reading teacher and a writing teacher, we do a lot. So looking at a problem from the point of view of a lawyer or a sculptor or an electrician or an actor or a journalist, anything but looking at it from your current perspective. He also talks about start tripping, as in go out, see things, the botanical gardens, the zoo, go on a hike, the park. All of those places are places where creativity can grow. And he suggests keeping an idea log. Says a lot of famous creators like Thomas Edison, Benjamin Franklin, Leonardo da Vinci, all kept journals in which they kept ideas. So he suggests keeping a notepad, a sketchbook, an iPad, voice memo recorder. My husband is writing a novel, and he carries a voice recorder around with him all the time, and records his thoughts with his voice. Step 4 is play. I really like this step. I think it is a great idea. He says that when you let your mind wander, you are more creative. And when you use your imagination and envision what is possible, all of those are play. We see this in young children when they're playing make-believe. And unfortunately, he points out, we see that leaving children at a much earlier age. So in step 4, he gives, again, lots and lots of activities to do. One is to explore your future. What does your future look like 10 years from now? 20 years from now? What's the best thing about achieving that goal? Why did you choose that goal? What's the first step and so forth. Talks about visualizing your space. So imagining where you work, where you do your everyday things, and then make the image change. Close your eyes and make it, what would you do to make it better? Money being no object. He stresses the importance of getting enough sleep. People who, there's research shown that people who get plenty of sleep, 6 to 8 hours a night, are 33% more creative. Makes perfect sense. He discusses being ready for inspiration. So we've all heard the old adage, you're in the shower and an idea pops into your head, or you're mowing the yard and automatically an idea pops into your head. And he agrees. He says, in the times when you're in the tub or on the treadmill or gardening, sitting through a board meeting, commuting to and from work, be open to ideas that come into your head at that time. And he talks about being a beginner. I love this idea. He says, get a new hobby, something you've never done, and learn it. So anything as simple from hula hooping, playing the harmonica, baking bread, juggling, to building model trains, or trying your hand at wood carving, starting a blog, building a website, take some cooking classes, go skydiving. Not something I would do. He suggests it, but that's for the not faint of heart, or those of us not afraid of falling. Taking piano lessons, anything that you're not already a master at or good at, becoming a beginner. Great step to creativity, to increase creativity. The fifth step is think. The best way to get a good idea is to have a lot of ideas. I loved some of the statistics in this chapter. Some of them that he shared is that Picasso produced 20,000 pieces of art. Einstein wrote over 240 scientific papers. Bach composed a cantata every week. Edison filed over 1,000 patents. Joyce Carol Oates published 45 novels, 39 story collections, 8 poetry collections, 5 dramas, and 9 essay collections. But if you think about it, most of Einstein's scientific papers are not cited by other scientists. Most of Edison's patents didn't make him a dime. Most of Picasso's artworks are not hanging on the walls of the world's top museums. The best way to come up with a great idea is to have a lot of them. So in step 5, he gives 3 suggestions. Well, he gives a lot. These are the big ideas, the broad ideas for his 3 suggestions. The first one is ideate. The most exceptional creators, he says, are known for their sheer volume of ideas. Not all of them are the one. And he also gives a great quote, nothing is more dangerous than having just one idea. Totally agree. His next suggestion is to transform. And this is to change the way you think about a solution. This example he gave flabbergasted me as a divorcee and parent. He says that he heard a story about a divorcing couple that after many long conversations about who would keep the house, who the children would live with, and where, these parents came up with a solution that reversed the usual logic. They decided to let the kids keep the house. The dad moved across the street and the mom to an apartment close by. And they took turns moving back to the family home to take care of the kids. So the parents changed living arrangements, not the kids. That is a definite transformation. Another suggestion was to schedule. He says, seriously, you should block out a chunk of time every single day that you know is a time where you're going to be relaxed and unhurried and distracted to think, to come up with ideas. I think for everybody, that is a great idea. In step 6, he talks about fusing. This quote from Steve Jobs: "Creativity is just connecting things. When you ask creative people how they did something, they feel a little guilty because they don't really do it. They just saw something. It seemed obvious to them after a while. That's because they were able to connect experience they've had and synthesize new things. And the reason they were able to do that was that they've had more experiences than other people." So we see a lot of what Sawyer has talked about in the book in this quote by Steve Jobs about getting out, about having a lot of ideas. So in the force section, he talks about force fusing. He gives some ideas to take two unrelated objects and make them related somehow, like a spoon and a book, or a shoe and a car. So to force your brain to fuse things, to synthesize things. He also suggests that making analogies is a great way to increase creative thinking. He gives an example of a paper company that asked its staff to imagine what it would be like to be the tree that's going through the process, to tell that story or to tell that process through the point of view of the tree. He also suggests doing a people mashup. In other words, asking a person from a whole different generation about your problem or your thoughts and seeing their point of view. Or so a different generation could be someone 30 years older or someone 30 years younger. And I will say, when I read that, I found that very interesting. I was once having an issue with trying to teach my students main idea at school, and I was mentioning it to my daughter Morgan, who was probably 6 or 7 at the time, and she came up with an amazing solution, which I still use to this day in my classroom for main idea. So that, I think, is an excellent idea. Step 7 is to choose. Scott Adams, the cartoonist, said that creativity is allowing yourself to make mistakes. Art is knowing which ones to keep. So if you think about that, and about in the last step, ideate, symphony orchestras only play about 35% of Bach's, Mozart's, or Beethoven's compositions. So again, they had multiple ideas, and very few of them are used but are brilliant. It's not a very high success rate, but to be creative, you have to generate a lot of ideas, and then, as you see in this picture, you have to let most of them go. And in step 8, you have to create. Nolan Bushnell, founder of Atari, says, "Everyone who's ever taken a shower has an idea. It's the person who gets out of the shower, dries off, and does something about it who makes the difference." So he gives a lot of suggestions for how to make it. I hear, as a teacher, I hear a lot of multiple learning modes here. Draw a picture, collaborate with others, take some photographs, make a collage, construct it. He talks about Tinker Toys and Legos and Lincoln Logs. Sing it, make some lyrics up about it, act it out, and of course, reflect on it. So I took these 2 pictures from the book. The first picture, the one on the left, is when you start his activities or his suggestions, the 8 steps, you go in order. So ask, learn, look, and so on. On the far left, learn, ask, look, make, play, choose, think, fuse. Then, in that same picture on the left, as you're trying to solve a problem or come up with ideas, you might zigzag from one to the other in a more, not in that order, the up and down order, the sequential order, but in a more zigzag pattern. But as you master the art of zigzagging, then you see on the picture on the right, those arrows go everywhere, back and forth, from make to write to fuse, from fuse back up to ask, from ask down to think, and so on. The arrows can go any way. You can use any of the strategies at any time. Again, if you're looking for a lot of activities to do, brain activities, this is a great book, very easy to read, very simple to follow, and with tons and tons of examples to keep your brain active and make you a more creative thinker. So I'm going to close with this final thought that he shares from Karen Lamb. And I have said this so many times to a friend of mine who struggles a lot with some personal issues. And when I read this, I had to smile because I think this is a brilliant thought. A year from now, you may wish you had started today. Time does fly very quickly, as has this class with all of you. I so appreciate your time tonight. Thank you so much for listening. I apologize for my voice and the coughs. I'm just getting over some kind of nasty flu. Thank you so much for your patience with me tonight. I hope you have a great evening.